Okay, good evening and welcome everybody. My name is Luke Hansen. I am one of the co-chairs of Sustain St. Paul. If you've never been to a meeting with us before, we are an organization focused on land use policy in St. Paul. We like to start by reciting our mission statement to give people a sense of what we're about. Sustain St. Paul champions, I'm trying to do this from memory, abundant housing, low carbon transportation, and sustainable land use in the city of St. Paul through political action, education, and advocacy in pursuit of a just and equitable city for current and future residents. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. This is a great opportunity to learn about the Hillcrest site in the northeast corner of the city of St. Paul, which was a golf course and now is being studied, and the city is proposing plans for redevelopment. We have two guests with us tonight, Mike Richardson and Monty Hillman. Mike is a planner with the city of St. Paul, and Monty is at the Port Authority, and they've prepared a presentation to tell us a little bit about the Ford site, or not the Ford site, the Hillcrest site, and to answer our questions. After that, we'll have some other business, but without further ado, please welcome Mike and Monty.
Thank you very much, and I want to confirm also with Monty that the plan is I will give my presentation, set you up, and then pass it over to you. Does that work for you, Monty? Great. And then also, thanks a lot for having us. I would also suggest, this is by no means how it has to go, but I would suggest that because of the nature of what I'm presenting and the nature of what Monty's presenting, it might work best for us to present those things in order and then have Q&A after that and have a discussion, if that works for everybody. Because I think what I start to talk about, Monty may continue to talk about and may answer some questions.
I think a lot of questions will get answered along the way, to Mike's point. So if we could get through these presentations relatively quickly. I just did mine in 15 minutes last week in San Diego, so I'll be succinct and then we can get to discussion.
I see head nods, so that's great. And mine was about 15 minutes when I did it earlier in this room, the San Diego of the Metro. All right, I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and you may all see all of you again. Let's see. I'm guessing you can see both. Oh, there we go. All right. Does that look like a full screen presentation to you all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So thanks again, everybody. I think all of sort of the introductory information was put out there. My name is Mike Richardson. I'm a city planner. And I just want to mention a little bit about what my role is at the city and on this project. I am supporting Bill Dermody, who is the project manager for Hillcrest, and working with Monty most of the time. I'm helping out and happen to be helping out primarily on sustainability issues. And so that's why I'm here tonight and talking to you about this. So while I may be able to answer general questions about the site, I may have to defer to Monty or get back to you with answers. So that being said, thank you very much. I'm going to keep going here. So in my presentation, I'm going to give a little bit of additional background on the site. I think some people are generally familiar with it, but just give you kind of the context of where it is, where we are in the process, and then spend the bulk of the time talking specifically about the draft sustainability materials that are being considered for the master plan. And then finally talk a little bit about how the city's efforts relate to the port's efforts on sustainability and sort of work to segue to Monty's presentation. So the process, at least from the city's point of view of doing planning work for Hillcrest began in 2020. The project really began, at least from our point of view, when we started doing background work on research establishing priorities. We established a technical advisory group. We established a community advisory committee and have been bouncing ideas off of them as we've gone through this process of sort of coming up with ideas, refining them, going back and repeating the process. So this gives just a simple sense of kind of where we've been, where we're at in the overall process. I think there's a draft master plan that will likely come out in the next month or two. We're putting the final touches on that and taking it to our technical folks, and then it will be released for review. This is a map from the city's comprehensive plan, and I included it because we may reference it later, but also to show you where Hillcrest is located in the very northeast corner, as Luke said, of the city. This is a little bit close, well, a lot closer view. The road on the north side of the golf course is Larpenteur Avenue, and on the east it's McKnight. It's pretty clear that it has recently been a golf course, and it's surrounded primarily by single-family residential. There's a little bit of commercial around. And talking very briefly about the history of the site. Before European settlement, obviously there's a long history, and after European settlement, it was served an agricultural purpose for a few decades. 1921, it became a golf course, and in 2017, the golf course ceased operations, and then the port purchased, I believe it was 2019. Monty can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was when the purchase happened. This is an aerial view from 2019, looking south, just to give you a better sense of the site. I've found that this is a helpful image. And then also wanted to note too, the material that I'll be focusing on today is part of a greater whole, and noting that there will obviously be other parts of the master plan. Sustainability is but one of them. You can see some of the other sections that you'll see once that plan is released. And I think the important thing to note to this group is that a lot of these elements like housing and transportation influence the overall sustainability of the site. And it's not easy to just kind of extract, oh, these are issues of sustainability when all of these other things contribute to that very idea. And then I wanted to note too that one of the challenges that we've had in developing the draft where we are now is we're trying to strike this balance between being effective and implementable. A lot of these things come with some costs associated with them, so we want to make sure that they're doable, and that we have policy backing, and that we know that they would be effective. There are a number of things that inform the sustainability chapter. A lot of it is found in city policy and ordinance. As I mentioned, we have the comp plan that talks a lot about sustainability. The Climate Action and Resilience Plan was adopted in late 2019, addressing a lot of climate change issues, carbon issues. Sustainable Building Ordinance, which is currently on the books and applies to projects that receive city funding, and our zoning code. We also have looked at Lead for Communities, and that's something that Monty's going to talk more on, I assume. And then there are a couple other sort of guiding documents that have been developed as we've been going through this process. So the Community Advisory Committee developed some priorities that we used. There was a memo that was exchanged that sort of established broad goals for energy and water. And then we also rely on expertise from the port and city staff and consultants that we have both hired. One of the things that I mentioned, Lead for Communities, one of the things that people have asked us is why aren't we focusing just on LEAD and sort of using that as our framework? And there are a couple of reasons for that. There are some city priorities that may not be fully addressed in the LEAD framework. And on the other side of the coin, there may be some LEAD strategies that aren't necessarily needed in the master plan. And then finally, and I'd say probably most important, is that the master plan is the official city policy once it's adopted by the city council, and LEED is a separate program and is not necessarily city adopted. So we need to have something that is adopted by the city as policy. When trying to approach sustainability at Hillcrest, I mentioned before when I was talking about the breakdown of the master plan chapters and how it's difficult to sort of isolate only sustainability elements. And we want to recognize that there are a whole bunch of aspects of sustainability, including human well-being, use of resources, resiliency, and ecological systems. And each one of these has its own sort of subgroups. So, ecological systems, habitat, water resources, air and soil quality. So you get to a very broad swath of topics very quickly. So when I go through the material, you'll see what we try to do is put that into semi-concise and effective goals and policies for the master plan. And then we're also developing a more detailed appendix that gets into more detail with some of this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So overall, the sustainability section is going to start with an introductory narrative talking about generally the policy backing and why this is important. And then we have 4 goals, all with sub-strategies. The first goal being carbon neutrality site-wide. The second, to integrate development with the ecology of the site. Third, responsible material and waste stream management. And fourth, to have our stormwater management be effective, integrated, and visible. I'll note that the stormwater material, I think there may be a separate section. We're still deciding on how that's going to be organized, but we'll talk about some of that content today. Also want to note that it's important, we didn't want to duplicate existing requirements. So there are a number of things that apply from a city, state, watershed district, federal level, and we wanted to include things that were not necessarily already required as part of those different ordinances. And then finally, all the things that you'll see in the draft when it comes out will apply to both public and private areas, unless it's otherwise stated. So I'm not going through everything that's in the draft. You'll see it's longer, but considering this group and sort of your expertise and your interests, I thought I would try to get it into a little bit deeper level of detail and just pull out a few policies. Some of these are a little bit condensed, but hopefully get the point across. So generally at Hillcrest, we want to support strategies that reduce carbon emissions overall. And as I mentioned, that can take a variety of forms, including providing alternative transportation options, making sure the land uses are varied enough and connected enough so that there can be sort of localized use of a variety of uses. And then also meeting citywide reduction in diversion goals. Really want to support LEED certification for buildings, significantly sized buildings. Use renewable sources of energy as much as we can, and especially for using on-site generation. We want to incorporate EV infrastructure, make sure that parking structures are at least EV ready, if not built out to support EV. Then also these last two, I'll talk a little bit about the financing asterisk there, but we're very interested in geothermal energy system at either site or district scale in order to reduce energy demand. And then I mentioned the sustainable building ordinance before, and that's essentially when the city provides money to a project, then there are sort of elevated requirements in terms of monitoring, in terms of building envelope, that kind of thing. So those last two, there are still some questions of financing, and Monty may get into that in his part too, but it's important to keep that in mind. The second goal is about ecology, and first, design any landscaping on the site to be primarily native. Make sure it's hardy to this part of the world, and as we anticipate changes to this part of the world, and try to have landscape areas connected to each other as much as possible. Plant trees so that when they reach maturity, they'll sequester as much carbon as was sequestered when the golf course was closed. Use diverse plantings instead of turf where we can. Reduce light pollution as much as we can. We have ordinances that have, say you can't go too dark. We also have Department of Public Works that's going to, have their input on that too. And then monitor and display air quality. So there were a lot of words that I just gave out, and so I'm giving a happy tree break for everybody's mental state, which I'm now going to pass by. All right, the last two goals. Responsible material and waste stream management. Okay.
Sorry about that, wrong button.
No, that's okay. I'll never show Bob Ross again. Waste stream management. This first bullet about eco-industrial strategies is aspirational, and the idea is that the waste product from one enterprise could be used as the input for another enterprise. And there's a lot of things that have to happen to make that go right. But it's something that the city's interested in and supports efforts in trying to see happen. Divert construction and demolition waste. We're still working on exactly what those numbers should be. There's some guidance from the city, obviously, from LEED, but we're still polishing that. And responsibly source construction materials. And finally, talking about stormwater management, we want to really make sure that stormwater is treated as a resource, and that we look at the benefits that it can have besides just needing to move from the surface to the river. And those things include things like creating passive recreation, habitat. It has aesthetic value as well. And speaking of aesthetics, try to make the stormwater visible through, I use light touch, but through a more naturalistic light touch aesthetic, and encouraging roof catchment and reuse as much as possible. So I mentioned, so that's the end of kind of the summarized content. I mentioned that there's this appendix. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but the idea here is, you can see on the left is one of the quarters of that big circle being ecological systems, and then broken down as we go to the right. So we want to make sure that if things are not being addressed in the master plan, that they're addressed somehow in some other regulation. And then we're also just tracking, is it supported by what policy? Is it at all addressed through LEED, or potentially by covenants by the board? So this is something that we're using to maintain, or we are maintaining to make sure that we're doing everything that we want to do. And in terms of implementation, it happens a number of ways, through the adoption of the master plan itself, through the building ordinance, as I mentioned, in the zoning code. Other state and regional ordinances will apply. And then the port will lead a couple of different methods of implementations, the two lead avenues, and then covenants. I'm guessing, excuse me, I'm guessing Monty will talk about this, but the port often will use covenants as a way to ensure that anybody who purchases the property, constructs and operates their building in a way that increases some element, whether has to do with stormwater or whether it has to do with energy. It's just a tool that they have. And then talking about potential funding sources, this is in flux, and if anybody has any ideas about additional funding sources, we are all ears. But grants for foundations, Minnesota DEED, grants from the federal government are potentially applicable here, and then PACE financing through the port is another possibility. So generally, the things that are upcoming, I'm hoping you hear an update from Monty, because I haven't talked to him about this for a while, but work continuing on energy modeling and working on feasibility for how district energy or geothermal might work. And then the master plan itself, like I said, in about a month or two, that should be released, and then we'll go through a public hearing, well, public review first, and then there'll be public hearings at both Planning Commission and City Council, and that's estimated to be the end of this year into the beginning of next, probably. We will see. But that is it. So I will turn it over to Monty.
Thank you, Mike. There we go. And I will try to share my screen here now. Oh, looks like it wants to be this one. Can somebody confirm we are screen sharing?
Yeah, I know.
Yep, can see your desktop.
Okay. Can you see lead for prioritizing net zero, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes.
Yep.
I somehow lost my Zoom window. 1 second here. It's just kind of tough to talk if I can't see you folks and I can't see myself. I don't know how much of an idiot I'm making of myself here. There we go. Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. Great setup for transitioning from sort of planning department, PED-led master planning into the actual development work as it relates to sustainability. You guys are seeing a slide that says prioritizing net zero and equity and lead for communities. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
It's not giving me my share notification here. So let me know if for some reason I stop sharing. To set a little context here. So the planning department, the city is working on the land use master plan. So it's setting sort of the broad framework of the expectations for the land use. Some of those expectations were set, frankly, 2 years ago by city council ordinance when we acquired the site. There were certain expectations for the development capacity of the site around housing units, around jobs, around parkland. That was part of the agreement between the Port Authority, an independent but related local unit of government to the city of St. Paul. Part of the agreement when we issued bonds to acquire the site. And so the box, if you will, was kind of set by that resolution, by that city council ordinance. And the goals were set out very broadly via a market study. We determined early on the site could absorb in the marketplace about 1,000 housing units, about 1,000 jobs, light industrial jobs. You know, the Port Authority's mission is to create quality job opportunities, expand the tax base, and advance sustainable development. The Port Authority has 21 business centers in the city of St. Paul with over 550 companies and over 25,000 jobs. Many of these jobs are living wage jobs with low barriers to entry, with great pathways to careers and great pathways out of poverty. It's kind of the unknown, unseen commercial industrial backbone of the economy of the city of St. Paul. Is what we like to think. We've taken these formerly contaminated, distressed properties and turned them back into private investment, bringing jobs, tax base, and sustainability to the city of St. Paul. So the city is wrapping up its work on the master plan. The Port Authority is just ramping up its work on what we would call the development plan. So two different things, very related, but the stuff Mike talked about is kind of at the 30,000 square foot, you know, what is the state of play of the framework for development, and the Port Authority's development plan is what really is the ground up bringing to life of that plan. So what I'm sharing with you here today is, I mentioned, well, and a little bit of background, because I think you folks probably care. I came into this work from the through the concept and the lens of environmental justice in the mid-90s, as we were starting to understand and formulate how to talk about concepts like environmental justice and environmental racism. My work at the university to get my degree was about brownfields and how we take these contaminated properties that are far too often in low-income BIPOC neighborhoods and how we create an environment that's ripe for reinvestment rather than disinvestment. In the 90s, I worked on the east side of St. Paul as an intern on the Phelan Corridor Initiative, then worked in the Frogtown and North End neighborhoods on the Great Northern Corridor, where the Port Authority was building 2 business centers on contaminated railroad property. And in between there, I worked for the state of Minnesota with some of the early thinkers in the 90s on sustainable design, on green design, green building. So that's the intention and the framework and the lens I bring to the work I do today at the Port Authority. And I think you'll see that throughout here. I'm a U.S. Green Building Council board member, past president, and just presented this information last week in San Diego at the USGBC's International Green Build Conference. So we're pretty jazzed about this, and I think you will be as well. You see this slide, we're gonna go to the start. So Hillcrest Golf Course. You've seen where it is. You've seen that it's a golf course. Obviously, this was created in the 20s by man, right? These fairways and the lines of these trees did not exist naturally. This was a shaped, man-made shaped golf course, primarily to serve the Jewish community in the 1920s, who was really not allowed to play at many other golf courses. You see the goals I talked about, the big picture goals that were enshrined in Ordinance 19-39, I think was the ordinance by which we were approved to issue bonds to acquire the golf course. It talks about housing units, light industrial, which in our world means living wage jobs with low barriers to entry, passive open space, wetlands, active park space, rights of way, etc. This was one version, a 2-dimensional version, as we started to try and put buildings on the site. This is all work in progress because the master plan is still working its way through approvals, but we had to start figuring out what does this actually mean. Watercolors and land use blobs are useful to some extent, but in our world, we have to get down to building square footage, job counts, wages, etc. And so we started trying to bring this to life. This work is ongoing, and you'll see more and more renderings of this work as we move forward. The site is a brownfield. It looks like a big, gorgeous green space. It, in fact, is contaminated by decades of use of a fungicide. This gentleman here is applying with what looks like a way too big squirt gun full of mercury. Golf course greens in Minnesota and cold climates notoriously grow mold over the winter months on the greens. And so this calochlor they would use and spray on the greens to reduce the mold growth over winter. Most golf courses, and there have been many redeveloped in the state of Minnesota, you would find this only on the greens. And that's what we expected and we knew as we went into the acquisition of this property. But as we researched the property, you see now here at the top, plan now for effective turf disease control in 55. So 1955, they were spraying this stuff with this gigantic squirt gun on this golf course, and continued for decades, frankly. I think well into the 70s, might have even been later, that this mercury product was being applied. So today, this is what we know to be the areas of contamination. What we would have thought would have only been the greens, these green areas, we have found high levels of mercury that need to be remediated in the fairways, in the tee boxes, in all of the wetlands except for one. So today, if someone were to say, well, just leave it an open passive park and let the public, it literally is not, according to EPA and state risk exposures, it's not safe for humans to be on and be exposed dermally with your skin, or inhalation through breathing, or ingestion through eating. So you wouldn't want to go have a picnic out here and see, like my 2-year-old, for example, eating the dirt, which she does all the time. You wouldn't want to see that out here. That would be unhealthy. That would be a risk. So it's relatively shallow, but it's pretty much across the site in that 0 to about 3 foot depth. So the topsoil, the root zone, the vegetative zone really does need to be managed. The Department of Agriculture regulates this particular contaminant. So we're working with the Department of Agriculture to figure out a safe way to clean up and redevelop this site. Mike mentioned LEED for communities. This, for those of you that are familiar with U.S. Green Building Council, LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, is an international standard. There are 7 billion square feet of real estate certified under LEED today. It is a market leader for establishing proper sustainable design of buildings and built spaces. The LEED for Communities platform here is the first one that deals with a really broad swath of large community redevelopment. So as you see the categories, natural systems and ecology, transportation and land use, water efficiency, energy and greenhouse gases, materials and resources, quality of life. This LEED for Communities platform touches all of the topic areas that as a land developer, the Port Authority is generally a public sector contaminated land redeveloper. All of the issues we would touch in doing land development are contained somewhere within this LEED scorecard. So if you care about air quality, it's on here. If you care about green spaces or stormwater or potable water or sanitary wastewater, there is all a metric, a language, a definition. And so the thing we really like about LEED for Communities is it provides all of us that are involved in this project across agencies, across government, public sector, private sector, regulators, funders. It gives us all a common language and common definitions and common metrics. So when we say we want something to be sustainable, that's an intention. What does that mean? How sustainable is it? Well, this is an international standard to help us vet and think through and verify that we are in fact doing sustainable things on this site. One of the things that LEED for Communities frankly is lacking, and one of the things that the Port Authority, I've been asked to join an international work group on LEED for Communities focusing on equity, because one of the things that's lacking in LEED for Communities right now is very granular understandings of equity strategies that we all need to be thinking of and bringing to bear in these type of projects to make sure they are both environmentally regenerative and socially equitable. So we look at Hillcrest through a lens of wealth creation strategies. And as much as we learn from LEED for Communities, we are also teaching the system, this international system, that needs these examples of things we've done in St. Paul for decades. Our workforce agreements, the St. Paul Port Authority's workforce agreements we've used since the 1990s are well ahead, above and beyond what would be required in LEED for Communities. So we want to teach others doing this kind of work around the world how to do workforce development better, local job training and recruitment better, etc. We have some lessons learned that we can share with the world, and Hillcrest is an example of that. So some of the wealth creation strategies we intend to deploy at Hillcrest. We are right now working on a new workforce agreement. The Port Authority's workforce agreements require a minimum job density, a living wage, local hiring efforts, etc. But it's a 30-year-old model. I've been at the Port Authority 16 years. I inherited it from my predecessors. We are right now working on reformulating that in a way that focuses those workforce agreements around value and recruitment and priority for companies that exhibit good social justice behavior, corporate behavior that furthers our social justice goals. So we'll get into that a little further here. Vendor supplier diversity we'll touch on. Just 2.0, a great program of the International Living Future Institute. Renewable energy deployment and workforce development. In order to, we have an aspiration to make this a net zero carbon site. In order to do that, we have to deploy 12 to 14 megawatts of solar, a district energy system, potentially battery storage, EV charging, there is a great opportunity here to recruit local residents, St. Paul residents, into this project to be trained into these new emerging industries of the green economy. And we've also heard that deeply and permanently affordable housing is a way to promote intergenerational wealth and to help build wealth in communities. So those are all things we are actively pursuing on a number of fronts as wealth creation strategies at Hillcrest. The workforce agreement I mentioned, we want to see demonstrated and reward performance for diversity and inclusion efforts with the companies we attract. We want to see wealth creation strategies deployed within these companies. That could be giving priority for a company that does profit sharing or home ownership counseling or down payment assistance or tuition reimbursement and tuition assistance. The tried and true methods that we know over generations have increased familial wealth that we know many of our neighbors have unfairly been excluded from over the decades. So we want to find a way to lift up companies that are helping us achieve these goals. We do want a geographic focus. We believe the communities that we do these projects in need to see immediate benefit in terms of local hiring and job recruitment and workforce development. And we need to get a little smarter than we were 30 years ago about what we called a quality job. This one's a little tricky, but all too often as a sustainability professional for 25 years, I can tell you that we in our frankly largely white liberal elite sustainability world have failed on delivering equitable development at the sacrifice of environmental development. We think these things have synergies. We can do both, but it's tricky. So our property assessed clean energy financing, which we will offer for all buyers out here, if not require. We're not quite sure if we can require it, but we certainly can make it easy. What if the PACE financing benefits of the federal investment tax credit and the depreciation of building owner realizes, what if they, through a gross lease model, were passing those savings on to entrepreneurs that we wanted to encourage business development at the site? Walkability and jobs. We want the site to be walkable, and yet some of our larger employers in Port Authority business centers have these 200,000 square foot buildings, which need 5, 7, 10, 12 acre lots, which is not in conformance with what our planner friends would tell us is a walkable distance, right? So how do we solve for doing walkability while also attracting these large employers? This would be in a net zero deployment, this would be an electric only community without natural gas. Well, what about our restaurateurs who have spent their careers learning and cooking with natural gas? How do we retrain and deploy resources to not axe them out of this development? Because environmentally, we want it to be electric only, no natural gas. But we don't want to discourage the kinds of entrepreneurs that we know can make this a very vital community. So a number of equitable and regenerative synergies that Lead for Communities has given us the framework to talk about, and we're wrestling through these issues really as we speak. These are just a few quotes from some of our stakeholders in the area. I won't read these. This one is from our council member, Nelson Yang on the east side. This one is from Rachel Speck, who works with the Eastside Employment Exchange. The Employment Exchange, the Port Authority helps fund. It represents 12 cultural and nonprofit community groups that help feed the workforce development system to create these job opportunities and align them with the businesses we bring to these sites. This is William Schultz, Bill Schultz from Vivid Concepts, one of our Eastside Area Business Association board members. So I mentioned earlier, we are asked how the Port Authority spend on developing this site, engineering the site, planning the site is furthering our social justice goals, our racial equity goals. JUST is a program of the International Living Future Institute. They brought us the red list of hazardous building products we want out of our buildings decades ago. They were the first through the Living Building Challenge to certify net zero buildings. They have now developed JUST. And JUST is what it says here, a voluntary disclosure tool for organizations to report on social justice indicators. And we have required by contract our largest consultants on this project, who might work for us for a year or 10 years, who might make $100 grand or $1 million working on this project. We have required them to pilot this project, this platform with us, to see if it's an appropriate platform for buyers of services, particularly in the public sector, to get smarter about where we spend our dollars, and for sellers of services to connect with their customer base better. So we've got, I think, 4 of our largest consultants piloting this information, tracking this information with us. And we don't have all the results yet, but we are already starting to see a change in the industry by the Port Authority indicating we're going to determine where we spend our dollars based on these kinds of inputs. We're already starting to see other competitors say, we'll do that. Oh yeah, we'll sign up. We'll do that also. We'll give you that information voluntarily. So we're trying to use market forces to further our common social justice goals. We support a carbon-free community at Hillcrest to the extent that this is one of the first questions. Oh,
So sorry about that, folks.
no problem. This is one of the first questions that was asked of us by our design team when they said, okay, you said you want it to be net zero, you said you want it to be carbon-free, to what extent? The first answer to this question is to the extent that it reduces social and economic disparities. We need to find those synergies of equitable and regenerative development that make this site more attractive to reducing disparities in our community. I've given you a few examples of those. We've thought through dozens of them, but that's core to our purpose. We're not going to solve this site as a net zero site by saying everyone's just going to sign up to this or that utility program and pay 10 or 15% more for energy. This is a community that's already energy burdened, and so we need to reduce those energy costs rather than increase them. We want this to be a carbon-free community to the extent that it doesn't price the site out of the marketplace. We still need to bring this jobs and investment and tax base to our community. So we have to do this in a way that works in a market context. And finally, we support a carbon-free community to the extent that it brings joy to our community. That's the real reason. That's the why we do this. That's the why we want affordable housing options and quality job opportunities and amenities and park space and open space. When those land use issues are solved for by those of us that work in those disciplines, our families can feel joy. And that's why I do this, frankly. This is some of the definitional stuff about net zero. I'm not going to get super in the weeds here. Scope 1, Scope 2 are the game plan we have figured out for Lead for Communities. Involves being net zero carbon for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions at the site. Happy to talk to any further in great detail about what this means. But basically, the game plan that we are trying to implement is net zero carbon for buildings, infrastructure, and transportation. We don't know anyone else in the world. A lot of people in the world have planned for this. No one else has pulled it off yet. So we think we're helping write the playbook for other communities as to how we do this. This is some of the research we've done. The city of St. Paul's baseline for tons per capita CO2 emissions. This is the language, this is the metrics that we share through Lead for Communities, is already about 9. So we already hit the prerequisite for Lead for Communities. If the Port Authority did what it's done for the last 20 years, in terms of encouraging, cajoling, negotiating with our buyers to build energy efficient buildings, we think we would get to 4.4. What we think we can reasonably deploy in the marketplace is bundle 1 at 1.9 tons per capita CO2, which basically means every business is required to max out its rooftop with solar. Every business is required to hook up to a very efficient district energy system. And every building has to be built to 80 or 90% more efficient standards than it would be today per the energy code. It's a pretty big lift, but we think we can get there in the marketplace. The last big chunk in green left remaining is transportation. And in our mind, the difference between bundle 1 and bundle 2 not in our mind, in our math, is really about the difference of EV charging, transportation, how many people live and work on the site so they can walk to work, how many are 2-car families versus 1-car families. Once we deal with the buildings, which we think we know how to do, the transportation becomes the last real difficult piece to solve for. So we've analyzed this, we've spent a year, we thought it would take 3 months, it's taken about 1.5 years, frankly, to figure out how to deploy net zero carbon across this site. If we do residential energy efficiency at 80 to 90%, industrial building energy efficiency, a district energy system, solar and EV charging, I like to think of it at this stage as like 75 million bucks in 3 25 million buckets. While there are those $75 million in costs, we also look at the savings. We believe there's an offsetting amount of savings. We right now are working with the smart finance folks at the City of St. Paul, at the St. Paul Port Authority, at Evergreen Energy, District Energy St. Paul, some of the brightest thinkers in our state, if not our country, to figure out how do we turn 75 million, how do we offset $75 million in costs with $75 million in savings in some kind of financeable market context. And those are pretty interesting discussions on really a weekly basis in our work. Some of the energy strategies, these would be all electric communities. We believe this will require a district energy system, most likely an aquifer thermal energy storage system, the one that is either being deployed or talking about being deployed at Towerside, if you're familiar with in Minneapolis. A ton of rooftop solar and a little bit of ground mounted solar. This is a light industrial building in a Port Authority Business Center. This is on the, this is in Frogtown. This is at Dale Street and Pierce Butler, Banbro. There's a community garden in the front of it. There are dozens and dozens of folks working livable wage jobs in this building. It's not terrible to look at. This is not smokestacks. These are living wage jobs for our community members. So some of the lessons we've learned as we've gotten as far as we've gotten in the last couple of years since we bought this site, you know, regenerative and equitable development is possible, but it won't happen without intention. Our white liberal elite, mostly, sustainability movement has done a pretty terrible job of delivering equitable development. Conversely, our mostly white conservative elite commercial real estate world has not delivered either one of these as kind of a baseline, this is what we do scenario. I work in sustainability. I'm a licensed commercial real estate broker, so I get to take blame and do double duty on both of these fronts. But we haven't done well on either, frankly, in my opinion. Lead for Communities can help drive this, starting with the land development. It does provide us that common language and common metrics. Just, we believe, can help drive corporate social justice behavior. We've seen that. Land use matters. You know, we often see Lead for Neighborhood Development is a different program within U.S. Green Building Council. And I was frankly not a fan, and it certainly doesn't apply to Hillcrest. It really is about high density condos and coffee shops. Hillcrest is basically a suburban site. You go across the street, across McKnight, you're in Maplewood. This is a suburban site. It is a well-located site to drive the kinds of, yes, single story, but single story also means low energy density. It means big flat roofs for a ton of solar. And inside the building, the functionality inside the building that as sustainability professionals we need to remember is economic development, is living wage jobs with low barriers to entry. We continue over the decades to zone this light industrial land out of existence because of market forces, because of price pressure, because of political or neighborhood pressure. It's not dense enough, it's not sexy enough, etc. But there is a real cost to that. There's a real cost to losing our employment base. And then right now, the largest employer in this neighborhood is the Cub Foods. There are 30,000 residents in District 2, and I think 3,000 or 4,000 jobs. So most people in this neighborhood have to commute 10, 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes away to get to work. That's something we think we can help rectify. And of course, partnerships matter. Mike, Luis, Bill Dermody, Nicole at PED have been wonderful. And we don't do any of this work without their partnership. So that was probably more than 15 minutes, sorry, but I thought you folks wanted the full meal deal. So please feel free to reach out with any questions about Hillcrest.
Awesome. Are there questions in the audience, folks? You can raise your hand using the little raise your hand function. Like Ian's got one.
Yeah, hi.
I
Ian
imagine
Buck.
I probably look like colorful sound waves.
Sorry, that was my computer talking.
Neat.
Ian, Ian Buck.
Yeah, so I'm Ian. I live in Frogtown. I used to live up on the east side in Dayton's Bluff. One of the co-chairs of the St. Paul Bike Coalition. I love that this plan takes into account so many other things besides just like how efficient are the buildings themselves, right? You know, I love that transportation is taken into account. And one aspect of transportation that I've been thinking of that is, I mean, honestly, very difficult for like the folks who are doing the development themselves to address is just like how transit accessible is the area, right? And I was just kind of fiddling around on Google Maps just now, and it's like, you know, the 74 and the 64 seem to be the only nearby lines, and they're you know, a good walk away from the Hillcrest site. Has there been any kind of coordination with Metro Transit on like, heads up, we're gonna have a moderate density neighborhood here that is going to drive like transit demand? What can we do?
There absolutely have been those discussions. They've been happening within the master planning context in what's called the Technical Advisory Committee. They've been happening with our staff and consultants within Lead for Communities. We have to analyze and model transit accessibility. And really what it comes down to from Met Transit's perspective, Mike, you correct me if you think I get it wrong here, is this all sounds great, guys, but really what you're engaged in, and this is what we do, what we've done for 50, 60 years, is speculative land development, right? We're gonna buy the land and we're telling everyone all this great stuff is gonna show up. Met Transit's kind of like, well, great, when it shows up, let's talk about ridership and we'll provide service. But right now, there's no one on this 112 acres that's causing demand. So we do believe there'll be a partner moving forward. I believe in Lead for Communities, we had to, we have submitted for what's called pre-certification in Lead for Communities at the platinum level, which means across that scorecard, we had to lay out a plan well beyond the master plan level, at the development plan level, of how we were gonna tackle every one of those credits and how many points we thought we were gonna get. I believe in that plan as it relates to transit. We had to commit to, or at least commit in our plan to build upgraded transit structures, right? I mean, this is Minnesota. Waiting at a bus stop, I've been there, waiting at a bus stop in 15 below weather sucks if there's no light and there's no heat. So we're committed to upgrading transit facilities. Met Transit, when they see the ridership that will result from 1,000 housing units and 1,000 jobs, we believe they will be a partner in delivering the service. That said, to accomplish some of those carbon-free goals, we are actively pursuing ride share, bike share, scooter share, EV charging fleets, all this sort of stuff to really take us into what is the future 10 years from now.
Teresa Nelson.
Hi, Monty, could you share how many parking spaces will you be providing on site per residential unit and also with the employers?
That is something I don't have at my fingertips. I can jot myself a note and get back to you here. You know, the city has done away with parking minimums. but there still are expectations in the marketplace. By and large, a lot of our buyers, when we say we require one job per 1,000 square foot of building, meaning if you have a 50,000 square foot building, you need to show up on day one with 50 jobs. The employers will tell us, okay, then I need 50 parking stalls. And if a few of those people take the bus, great. We've got customers, we've got vendors, all of which need parking stalls. So I'm a little more familiar with how we look in the market at parking on the light industrial side. The housing side, I would have to get back to you with whether we've modeled, one car per unit, et cetera. I do recall when I was working in Frogtown, the north end, we used to talk about Great Northern Business Center and the Como Front Dale intersection being a walkable urban village. And if we could take a family from being a 2-car family to a 1-car family, this was 20 years ago, we would put $9,000 per year of disposable income back in that family's pocket from not having to service a second automobile. So I can certainly get back to you on parking stalls, because we have modeled and committed to a certain percentage of those being EV charging, either infrastructure ready in the ground or EV charging ready in a building.
With that, just a follow-up question, will you unbundle parking from the cost of housing so that it is possible for someone to live in this development without having to purchase a parking spot?
We are not a housing developer. We are serving as the land developer here. So as it pertains to the actual arrangements of the ground up housing developer and how they might rent or not rent units to under some financial structure to their tenants, that's at a level of detail we're certainly not at yet. And so I don't have a good answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Just as you know, Move Minnesota does work with developers and property managers on TDM strategies, transit demand management. And so we're here and available as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I think Jean Comstock had her hand up next.
Hi, Jean, how you doing?
Hi, Bonnie. Good, thank you. I was wondering, you mentioned the Port Authority was getting ramped up to work on a development plan. Could you tell me, where does that fall into the time frame as to when it'll be done? And could you just say a couple more sentences about what will be in it?
Yeah, development plan is maybe, I guess that's what we call it. I don't know that it ever is a physical plan. Maybe it's a development strategy, but so starting in May, Mike and the folks at PED had been running a community engagement series for over a year and a half about the master plan, about the land use plan. Starting in May, we were getting so many questions at these kinds of levels of detail, we realized we had to start fleshing out, okay, what does the ground up development look like in reality? So starting in May, we started a series of public community engagement meetings in partnership with Councilmember Yang's office and District 2. I think you guys were at St. Paul 350, was out in force at the sustainability one.
Right.
We've had one on housing, we've had one on jobs. We were doing them all summer and we will continue to do them. They will transition into work groups focused on those topic areas, jobs, housing, sustainability, et cetera. And will help us shape the development plan. The development plan itself, I guess, I don't really see being a static document at any point. It's more a statement or a guidebook of priorities and intention and recruitment, be it of a particular style of housing development or a job type or design or ecological wetland stormwater type stuff. So I hopefully that's a little clearer, but because we do speculative land development, I can't create, the development plan has to be an idea that then encompasses what shows up in the marketplace. Because the development plan only gets built by who builds it. So we kind of have to set these principles. Our covenants that Mike mentioned help set those principles. Our development criteria how many jobs per 1,000 square feet, these workforce agreements, all of that together is this maybe nebulous thing called the development plan. I can certainly bring it back to our team and see it's just so hard over a decade of, we anticipate this being a decade-long absorption period of development period. And it's so hard to put a stake in the ground in year 1 or year 3 and anticipate what really year 8 and 9 and 10 look like.
It's not something that we should anticipate trying to find out and get a copy and.
No, don't think of it like
kind of.
Don't think of it like a land use plan. Think of it as these work groups, these institutional controls, these covenants, these workforce agreements, all together formulate this thing that I guess we call a development plan. I don't ever see it as Beacon Bluff. We just finished redeveloping the 3M campus for the last decade. We never had a development plan. We had some community priorities. We had community input into covenants, workforce agreement. I mean, on and on and on. But it wasn't a standalone thing, I guess. It's a thing made up of multiple components.
Yep. Thank you. That helps. That's what I needed. Thank you.
Okay.
Could I add one quick thing about that, on that topic?
Sure, Mike.
Please, thank you very much. I was just going to add that I think one of the helpful things about having the port do the development strategy, development plan now and sort of overlap with the city's process in adopting the master plan is it allows us to test the land use plan and everything that's in the master plan, and we can say, is this working together? So we have this period of time where we can say, we better check this, or this is good, or we're underestimating this or overestimating that, whatever it is. So it helps us refine our plan as well now. And then once that's adopted, Monty and his group will continue from that point and do the physical development. But that's something that really helps us right now at the stage that we're in.
Awesome. I'm just trying to take these in order. We've got 2 more questions we'll wrap this up. Jan and Pope, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, if I can get myself unmuted. Yes, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Monty, for your presentation. We've talked to you in the past, and thanks, Sustain, for doing it. Just 2 questions. District energy, is that going to be, is it planned yet? And is that geothermal that you're talking about? And then secondly, can you just give me, because I do the housing side, what are a couple of examples of light industrial jobs?
Gotcha.
Or, that you might expect would locate at Hillcrest?
Gotcha. I can do both for you.
Great, thank you.
One of which is a document I'm trying to pull up here, and I'm not sure if I'll have my fingertips on it. So the second one being the type of jobs. So if you drive down Phelan Boulevard, you will see 3 Port Authority business centers. Williams Hill, right at 35E, and Phelan, where it kind of terminates there. You will see Westminster Junction Business Center, and then Beacon Bluff. Companies like Loomis Armored Car, companies like Health East Ambulance Facility, where there are mechanics working next to EMTs. Vomella Printing is one of the most recent ones. Vomella just installed a 1.3 megawatt solar system on its rooftop.
That's right, yeah.
So Vomella prints, they have a national footprint. They print the large format commercial printing, like say you go into a Best Buy and you see a sign hanging from the ceiling that says mobile phones. They print and assemble everything needed for 500 Best Buys to install that sign. So you literally could go there with very little job experience, very low barriers to entry, and you might get a job there being the person that counts the screws to put in the Ziploc bag to go in the box to install the sign.
And how much might I make? Yeah, sorry.
You know what? The document I'm trying to share with you is some workforce reporting. We do very diligent tracking and reporting on workforce issues in these companies. I want to say right now, 2020, Average wages across the 12 or 15 companies that were reporting were $23 an hour. Obviously, in a company like Bomella, where it's their world headquarters, you could rise through the ranks. We look for companies that have pathways, career pathways.
Okay, great. And that's probably on your website. I mean, I can go find stuff too.
Yeah, I'm trying to find, I'll send this to you folks here imminently once I find the right document, which is our 2020 workforce reporting. We've shared it a few times in these community engagement meetings, and it really is, we hear a lot of assertions about what is or is not reality in a Port Authority Business Center. Well, we track that stuff. These companies contractually have to report to us, employee by employee, position by position, where these people live, how much they make, and we consolidate all that. And I'm happy to share that with you as soon as I find the right file here.
And the stuff along Como between, like Dale and Marion, that's Port Authority's stuff too, right?
Great Northern Business Center North, Great Business Center South. So Warner Stellion, Custom Drywall, Summit Fire Protection, Dakota Plumbing, on and on and on.
Okay, got it.
Great.
Thanks.
Janet, we're gonna take one more question. Looks like Dan G, if you can unmute and perhaps uncamera yourself. Or camera yourself or.
Yep. Hi, folks. This is Dan. First of all, I'd like to thank Mike and Monty and everyone else who's participated in this for presenting a very complex and extremely aspirational description of what the project could look like. A couple of questions I have are, how do we, as your average citizen, engage in continuing to understand how this project will evolve? And the second question is, what sorts of participation do our local politicians have in this area, particularly the district, state, city, county politicians?
So,
go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I would say for your first question, Dan, there is we have a Hillcrest website on the city, and I can send that out. I assume that if I send it to Liz or Luke, you could distribute it to. Okay, and that has relatively up to date information on it, including ways to keep track of it. I would say things are going to start happening quickly in the next month or two, and remember that there are these two phases. We have the Planning Commission phase, which will be a review, public hearing, re-review, and then they'll recommend something to the city council. And then at that point, there's another public hearing, but that city council process goes much faster than the Planning Commission one does. So be prepared for that and be thinking about that. And then in terms of engagement by politicians, Monty may be able to speak to this more, and I'm sure Bill, our project manager, would. But I know that the mayor's been involved a lot. Councilmember Yang has been very involved and brought together numerous sort of focus groups to talk about various issues, housing, employment, and that kind of thing. So I know our local electeds are pretty involved, especially on the east side. In the mayor's office. But Monty, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So two things. I just shared in the chat a Dropbox link to the document I just started sharing on the screen. Our East Side Workforce Review for 2020 reporting. You will see the employers, the agreements we have with them, how many jobs they had, how many jobs they promised to have, how many are East Side residents, St. Paul residents, et cetera, average wages. So this is a ton of data. Again, for another time, happy to come back and discuss this more in detail. This is the meat and potatoes of, as an economic development organization, what we have hung our hat on for 30 plus years is these kinds of metrics.
Thanks so much. Can you share that link in the chat so we can all have access?
I did hit send in the chat. It is a Dropbox link. So let me know if you don't.
Yeah, Dan, if you open the chat, it's there.
Okay. So you should be able to access that. If not, I also just hit send on a PDF of that document to Melissa Wenzel.
Yep, many thanks.
Who invited me. Question about involvement. When the Port Authority did Beacon Bluff, the former 3M campus, we had 36 different funding sources across every level of government. So whether it be stormwater, whether it be net zero, whether it be base infrastructure, workforce development, affordable housing, we tap it all. And there will be various points at which we need help supporting that work. One of the big ones coming up is going to be when we get to a little better understanding, probably a couple months away, fourth quarter-ish yet this year, feels like we will have an answer and a game plan for a district energy system. That was one of the other earlier questions. Aquifer thermal energy storage, ATES, is the type of system we are seeking to deploy here. Rather than building by building geothermal, it is a geothermal system, but it is an advanced energy system that's just starting to be deployed in the Midwest. You see it in other countries, you see it in other on the coast, but we think we can bring it here. So the ordinance that allowed the Port Authority to acquire the site left open two big asks that we can come back to the city for an advanced district energy system and affordable housing. And those would be financial tools. We will need the city support and likely city council approval to go forward on either of those two paths, affordable housing TIF and or an advanced energy system, district energy, aquifer thermal energy storage, geothermal, et cetera. Those are places that we believe we would need and love to activate some support from folks that are interested in those areas. There are a ton of other needs, but for a group like this, I think that's the two I can lift up as being like, hey, here's where you could really help. When we start really making that forward push. If it's just the Port Authority saying, this is what we think is the greatest idea, that's one thing. If it's a grassroots efforts of community advocates saying, hey, we want to see this happen, that was my role 20 years ago in Frogtown, the North End, and I know the electeds listen. And every level of elected government will be paying attention and will benefit, frankly, from the housing, economic development, sustainable development that's going to happen in Hillcrest.
Monty,
Great.
will that advocacy
very much.
opportunity be also near the end of this year, do you think? You said that that's when you as support authority will determine if that's going to be an option that you can push forward. Will the advocacy opportunity happen at the same time, or will that be later, do you think?
We were about through the analysis, and as Mike and his team at the planning department put forward this master plan, we envisioned multiple things. That's so February 2022, Mike, maybe slides into March. I think we're still looking for a master plan approval. I don't want to commit to delivering a district energy system in a master plan if we don't know we can finance it. We don't know if we can finance it unless we likely have city support to finance it. So this next kind of 6 months will be a great opportunity. We need a few weeks, maybe a couple months tops to get our ducks in a row with Evergreen District Energy. We're actively working with Excel on how to tie this all together in this advanced energy system. But we would be happy to put this group on blast when it's go time, and it's coming pretty soon. In the next 6 months, I would say.
That sounds awesome. And I think we do need to move on, but I think we need to give a big round of applause to Monty and Mike for, everything they've shared with us today. Some really exciting stuff. Luke, did you have a question, or is that an applause? That's an applause. All right,
That's
everybody,
an applause.
big round of applause. Yay. Thank you so much. And I think, I'm sure if we have further questions, Melissa will follow up, and we appreciate, like I said, if you have reach outs or things like that, things that need to be, action steps, please do. You can probably work through Melissa, but let us know and we'll communicate that with our members. So thank you.
Thank you guys for being organized. Thank you guys for being advocates. We couldn't do this type of work without grassroots support. So thank you so much.
Great.
Thanks, Monty. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much. So folks, we still want to try to close the meeting out on time. We are going to skip the optional work group breakout And I'm just gonna let Luke jump right in here. He's gonna update you on the St. Paul zoning study, what we're doing, and then a couple other items, and then we're gonna close it out, okay?
Great, thank you, Liz. So as many of you know, or maybe you saw in the newsletter, the City of St. Paul's Planning and Economic Development team released some proposed amendments to the city zoning code at the beginning of September. This is part of a phase 2 process called the 1 to 4 unit infill study.